Good evening, everyone. John, I haven't got a sheet to go. Get the meeting started. Number one on the agenda is apologies. John?
Lord Mayor, we've had apologies from councillors Allen, Beecham, Cross, Dunn, Gallagher, Kevin Graham, Huddart, Anita Lower, Phil Lower, Councillor Rahman, Councillor Salidas, Councillor Stevenson, Stockdale, Talbot. Sorry, apologies, Councillor Pauline Allen is here, contrary to what I said earlier.
Item 2, the minutes. Does Council agree the minutes of the meeting held in Council on the 6th of November 2013? Item 3, official announcements. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to a guest in the chamber this evening, Dr. Lovu. He's in the city for the award of his PhD at Newcastle University today. He was born in Newcastle, South Africa, where he set up a trust to support students in his former township school. Studying for a PhD in archaeology in Newcastle University made him a very committed supporter of Newcastle United. He is now Senior Lecturer at the University of Pretoria, an Executive Member representing Southern Africa within the World Archaeological Congress, and also an active member of the Newcastles of the World Network. Please congratulate Dr. Lovu and welcome him and his wife here this evening. I would also like to offer a warm welcome on behalf of Council to Jessica Clapperton, who is here tonight. Jessica is a 13-year-old pupil from Gosforth Central Middle School. The reason she is visiting Newcastle City Council is because Newcastle is one of the 6 local authorities involved in the UNICEF UK Child's Rights Partner Programme. The Newcastle focus on the Child Poverty Act agenda and is on Let's Talk opportunities. Young people in Newcastle chose to look at what opportunities young people should have by the age of 11 and 16. Jessica was selected out of 17 volunteers from the UNICEF Agenda Day event on the 27th of November. I met Jessica in the council chambers earlier and she's absolutely lovely. And she looks even better in the Lord Mayor's robes. So 20 years' time she'll be here. Members were advised at the last meeting that the agenda for the 8th of January 2014 Council meeting will be circulated on Friday the 20th of December. That's the last courier before Christmas. The deadline for items is 12 noon on Wednesday the 18th of December. A note confirming the revised timetables has been circulated by email. There will be no courier service over the Christmas and New Year period, and normal service will resume on the 2nd of January 2014. Before we proceed through the agenda, can I remind all members to please recycle any unwanted papers at the end of the meeting. Correspondence. We've received a response from the Department for Education regarding PSHE education and a response from the Minister for Cities and Constitution regarding the youth and employment proposal. Does Council agree to receive the correspondence? Item 5, petitions. We have received no petitions this month. Item 6, public question time. We have received one request for public question time from Mrs. Pat Hillocks. Pat, would you like to come up and ask a question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. My question is for the Leader of the Council. At the Policy Cabinet meeting held in Blakelaw Neighbourhood Centre on Wednesday the 13th of November, there was only one item on the agenda: who decides in your neighbourhood? I attended this meeting and was very interested in what was said by the community members who were present. At the beginning of the meeting, Councillor Stevenson said, "We want to hear from you. We are here tonight to listen. And the key to success is local people and their passion for what they do." Councillor Todd wanted decision-making moved as much as possible to the local level. There was considerable passion expressed by the representatives of the various community groups who answered the question posed by you as Leader of the Council, and it was obvious that considerable community spirit exists in some of the wards in the city. Unfortunately, however, I do not think the question posed on the agenda was actually answered. Would you please answer this question now? Who decides in your neighbourhood?
Call on Councillor Forbes to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Mrs Hillocks to the Council Chamber again after a brief absence from it, during which she served as a councillor in this chamber for 7 years for the Westerholt ward. And out of interest, I went back and looked at the number of questions that you asked while you were a councillor, Mrs Hillocks. So I've got here the list of council questions asked between 2004 and 2011. I had to read quite a long way before I found it, because you asked one question while you were a councillor in those 7 years around signage and markings for disabled badge holder bays. I note, by the way, in that same meeting in January 2008, I asked 11 questions, Joyce McCarthy asked 4 questions, and Councillor Johnson asked 1. And perhaps the Leader of the Opposition would allow me to answer the question in my own way. Councillor Hillocks, Mrs Hillocks, came along to the Policy Cabinet meeting in Blakelaw. Policy Cabinets are a relatively new invention for us, because we don't do business in the way that business was done when you were a councillor here. Now we are open and we discuss things with people, and policy cabinets are a way of engaging with people in the city on the big questions of the day. So of course there was one item on the agenda, because that's what we were asking people of the city about. And the question was, as you've rightly said, who decides in your neighbourhood? And what this was getting at was not who in the council decides in your neighbourhood, but who in your neighbourhood decides that your neighbourhood should be full of litter. Who in the neighbourhood decides about levels of cleanliness and tidiness? Who in your community decides about the community endeavour that supports the lifeblood of local communities? Because the purpose of the Policy Cabinet was to engage with people in a new kind of conversation in the city, one which respects citizens and the role that they can play in making the quality of life in the city even better than it is already. Because we know, in the face of the massive government cuts that we face, the council will no longer be able to provide services in the way that it has for many decades. We have to change the way that we do things, and the way that we will do that is by working in partnership with local people, which is why the Policy Cabinet was designed to find out where the appetite was within different parts of the city for a different way of working, one in which communities take more control. So the honest answer to the question, who decides in your neighbourhood, is that it is local people who decide in their neighbourhood. And what we need in all of our communities, right across the city, is effective and strong community leadership. And that is the community leadership that I look around and I see being exercised by many of the councillors in this chamber, bringing together people in different communities to help support and sustain local community facilities, local community activities, and in many respects reaching out to people who aren't engaged in community life of the city. So the question, who decides in your neighbourhood, is very much up to the level of community spirit there is within the neighbourhood, the level of community support that there is in the neighbourhood, and the level of community leadership that there is within the neighbourhood. And I know, because I see it day in, day out, that my colleagues in Westerhope provide excellent community leadership in Westerhope, and long may that continue.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Thank you, Mrs Hillocks. Thank you. Item 7. Pleased to welcome Joy Brindle, the Assistant Chief Fire Officer from Tyne and Weir. Joy's here to give a presentation to Council. Hello.
Is this going to appear on the screen? Yes, it is. Good evening, everyone. I have been invited here to talk to you about some options for change to our operational response that we're currently consulting the public about. So I'm just trying to find a place to put my papers down. So I've also been told I've got to speak for 10 minutes only, and I'll do my best because I've got quite a lot of detail here. I want to talk a little bit about the why and not just the what. So I'm going to talk about... this is the wrong set of slides. I need to... I'm sorry, I don't want to present these slides to you because these are not the ones that are about our response service. Do you want me to hang around and come back at the end of the meeting and do these? Or do you want me to just put the memory stick in again? Sorry about that.
Is being loaded up. Can I just make a declaration which is already recorded in my declaration of interests, but I am one of the council's appointees to the Fire Authority, and therefore I believe that for the notice of motion later on, I have potentially disclosable pecuniary interest, so I'll have to withdraw from the meeting at that point. And although I don't think that affects my ability to listen to the presentation, I certainly don't think it affects my ability to listen to the presentation. I think it's worth declaring for the, in the interests of openness and transparency.
Right. Yes.
Right, where was I? So, what I'm going to talk about first of all is risk, because we're a risk-based service in the fire service. Then I'm going to talk about money, because that's the problem that we've all got, and us in particular. I'm going to talk about how we respond now, options for change, and the impact that that could have in Newcastle. That's a picture summing up what we do. Very briefly to look at this, to remind you, I suppose, that we're not just about responding to incidents, although that's what our core business is. We also do a lot of work with prevention. We go into people's houses and help them live safely. We do protection work with businesses where we help them to meet their duties to keep their customers and users safe. And we also have a big role in resilience, which is planning for the unthinkable. And you'll see that's an exercise outside the Civic Centre, which was about the dirty bomb scenario. And all of those are statutory duties on our service. We have a duty to prevent, to protect and to respond. These proposals are about our work in response. Starting off talking about risk, risk is high for fire in areas where there is a lot of deprivation and also areas where population is large. The pictures on here illustrate the levels of deprivation in Tyne and Weir, which I think you're all familiar with. There's a risk map there breaking down the local area by deprivation, and there is a lot of nationally published research that links deprivation with both accidental fires in people's houses and deliberate fires, both of which we have quite a lot of in Tyne and Weir. The bottom map is what we call a vulnerability map. We use information about the types of people that we know have fires, and that helps us to plan our services. So we are very much risk-based. Because we're risk-based, we target our activities. We're not universal other than for response. This slide shows a number of the things we do to target the most vulnerable people, from at the one side home safety checks and smoke alarms and advice on living safely, to at the other side a lot of work with vulnerable people, diverting them from antisocial behaviour, helping them to live safely. We also are trying all the time to think of new ways to target the vulnerable. At the moment, we're thinking about domestic sprinklers in the houses of vulnerable people to protect them should they have a fire. The result of all that targeting of community risk is that we've driven incidents down over the last 10 years. You can see the lines there showing them going down. The top line is all incidents. The blue line is fires. The red line is false alarms. That has remained fairly static. That is not a line that we want to see because a false alarm is a waste of resources. You don't always know it's a false alarm until you get there. The green line at the bottom is rescues, and a lot of them are road incidents. But you can see overall we've had a lot of success driving down incidents in our area and making Tyne and Wear safer. However, this slide shows us compared to the rest of the country, and you'll see that we still have the 5th highest level of incidents of any part of the country, which illustrates the fact that we're still a reasonably high-risk area. Most of the incidents are fairly small. 3% of them were large incidents, and we call those 4 pump plus. That means we have to send at least 4 fire engines to them, often more. But 3/4 of the incidents were what we call secondary fires. That's a small fire where there's no life risk or no significant property risk or a false alarm. These risk maps show where the incidents happen, and it's 3 years' worth of fires on the red map and 3 years' worth of special services on the green map, and that really just illustrates that there are some areas of Tyne and Wear that are more high risk than others, and we target our services at the areas of highest risk. The one at the bottom is a picture of a place in Gateshead, and it's looking at deliberate fires, and it shows that we can target right down to a street where these incidents are happening, so that we can target our services there. And we just routinely use information like this, and this is the sort of information we've used in reviewing our service. Moving on to money. Risk is the most important thing for us, but we have to balance risk with the available resources. Everybody's got a downward graph like this. This is ours. In the last, the period between 2010 and 2017, we will have lost 1/4 of our budget, and we've had to cut our coat according to our cloth, and the proposals in our consultation are linked to that. This is what we've done over the last 10 years to try and save money. We've been doing it for longer than the spending review period. You can see we were starting to do things back in the period 2002 onwards, the blue block at the beginning. That was about us changing our shape. We used to be all about response. Now we're about prevention. We did that without growing our resources. We did it by moving things around. The sharper dip at the end is the more recent period where we've moved from efficiency world to cut world. We've looked at our back office. We took 1/3 of our back office out in January. We've looked at management. We've looked at every other part of our business. We're now looking at the frontline service. Right, the next section is about how we currently respond to the risk. This is a picture of our deployment across Tyne and Wear. We're very much a Tyne and Wear-wide service. I know local individuals care about their local fire station, but we design the service to work well across the whole of Tyne and Wear. We've got 17 fire stations, 15 of them whole-time. One of them in Chopwell is part-time staffed, and one in Berkeley uses a new staffing model called day crewing. At those stations, we've got 30 fire engines, we've got 645 firefighters divided up into 4 watches. So that's what we've currently got, and that's what's protecting the people of Tyne and Wear. How we work. As I said, we work across Tyne and Wear, and this is an example of the firing biker, known as the Great Fire Biker a couple of years ago. This just shows where all the fire engines came from to put that fire out. There were 75 fighters on duty on that day, and they came from pretty much every part of Tyne and Wear. That's how we work routinely. If there's anything big, we'll send people from wherever they need to be sent from. And that's a very important thing about how we work. Speed. This map is a response map, and it shows how far we can get within the different station areas, that's the red lines, within 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. Again, we routinely map how long it takes to get to different places. We are very, very fortunate in Tyne and Wear. We've got good transport links. We've got very good speed. In fact, our average speed for the first fire engine to a primary fire, that's where there's a building risk or a life risk, 5 minutes 42 seconds. It's the fastest service in the country. The chart at the bottom shows how we go to other incidents with not quite such a sense of urgency, but even to an outdoor fire, which might be a wheelie bin or a waste paper bin or something in the middle of a field, we get there within 6 minutes 48 seconds. If you think about that figure when you look at the next slide, that's us compared to the rest of the country. Tyne and Wear being the fastest, the next fastest being Merseyside. We get to a rubbish fire in a field quicker than they get to a life risk fire. So our performance is very, very good. In coming up with our options, we analysed lots and lots of evidence. So we looked at the current and future risks, the risks that I've just been talking about there. We looked at incident data 10 years back and 3 years back. Even though incidents have come down a lot, we wanted to look at longer periods than just the last year. We looked at what we've got now, what we need in terms of resources in the future. We tested a lot of scenarios. We had firefighters trying things out to see how they would work, including appliance runtime tests. We looked at the total activities of the fire crew, not just response, because the firefighters do the knocking on doors and talking to the people as well. And we looked at different vehicle types and technology that were being developed in different parts of the country. I'm going to show you 3 bits of key evidence here that we did take into account. There was lots more than this, but I know I've only got 10 minutes. This is incidents by station and type. It shows all the stations in Tyne and Wear. You can see there's a large difference between the busiest and the quietest. You can also see the red line at the bottom is false alarms, and what the impact would be if we took those false alarms out. That would be really brilliant. Some people have said to us, in your options, why don't you just take out the quietest stations? The reason we haven't taken out just the quietest stations is that we've had to look at how the whole configuration of stations works in Tyne and Wear to see where is the best place to try modelling different things. We also divided incidents up into risk type. We called risk level 1 very, very high level risk, which is life risk and serious property risk, going down to level 3, which includes most of the false alarms, and level 4, which includes most of the small secondary fires, wheelie bins, etc. You can see from the pie chart that 3/4 of our incidents are level 3 or 4, so 1/4 of our incidents are high risk. And this last one shows the incidents by time of day, starting off with midnight at the far end and going up to 11 o'clock at this end nearest to me. You can see that there's a very stark difference in the number of incidents they have by day and by night. One of the things that we currently do is staff up to the same levels by day and by night. Looking at that, we had to ask ourselves, is that the right thing to be doing when we've got a lot less money? So the analysis, we have a lot of incidents. We have the busiest stations in the country. We don't have a huge number of stations, but we have reduced our total incidents by 47% over the last 10 years. There is wide variation in incident levels between the geography areas and at different times of day, and in terms of size and magnitude of the incidents. We've already done a lot of changes based on that information, including reducing 2 stations about 10 years ago, where in Sunderland we did something which is similar to what we're proposing in option 2 that I'll come on to. Took 2 stations out, built one in the middle, and it didn't increase the community risk. And that was done using similar information to this. We've always introduced change carefully and slowly without impacting negatively on the community risk or the firefighter safety. And with these options, if we implement them, we will do the same. These are the things we thought about, and these have built up our options. The first one is bringing in some new types of appliances which are smaller, which we would use with fewer staff to tackle low-risk incidents, and also maybe to get involved in diversionary work. That's been tried in a number of Mets. We'd also introduced dynamic call handling. What that means is that our control would have the power to decide which types of appliance go to different types of incidents. We've introduced a new control system which went live last week, and it will enable us to send an appliance from where it currently is. It doesn't have to be at a fire station. That's going to help us to be much, much faster. More flexible day and night cover, that's about standing down some appliances at night when we don't have as many incidents, but only in stations where the risk will stand it. Reducing the number of pumps and or fire stations, the proposals talk about a reduction in pumps, and a couple of the options talk about fire stations, and I'll come on to that. We're looking at, for the few one-pump stations that we currently have, having 4 firefighters on the fire engines. That's what we have in the rest of Tyne and Weir, so that will be bringing those stations into line. New technology, there's quite a lot of new stuff being invented that we haven't yet invested in, and that would help us to work effectively with less people. And lastly, we're looking at taking out an aerial ladder platform. This is the great big ladders that you can see there. We've got 3, we think we only need 2. When you actually put those together, we've come up with 3 options. This is option 1. This is the basis of all the options. So this is about doing the thing of having only 4 firefighters on an appliance, taking out 6 fire engines, introduce 2 of the smaller vehicles 24/7, and another 2 to be working in the evening, because that's when we have most of the antisocial behaviour fires that they would be dealing with, and standing down a couple of engines at night. That would be implemented over 3 years, as I said, slowly and carefully, and that would reduce our establishment by 131 firefighters, and it would reduce our costs by £5.1 million. That would make a very large contribution to our meeting our budgetary targets, although actually what we need to save is about 8 million. So if anybody says, you know, you're taking all of this out of the front line, that's not the case. This is the sort of change that we think can be safely implemented. We will still have to find other ways of saving some more money. Option 2 is the same, but it also includes closing Gosforth and Wallsend stations and building another one in the middle to cover both those areas. That would not involve taking out any additional staff. It would save an additional £170,000 in running costs. And thirdly, option 1 and 2 plus close the station in the centre of Sunderland, which is surrounded by 3 other fire stations, and that would save an additional £340,000. So those are the 3 options. In terms of the impact, I've put all the impact for Newcastle on one slide. This is a fairly, well, it's okay, I'll just talk through it. So if you look in each chart, there's a status quo column. So at the moment, we've got 8 fire appliances at the 4 Newcastle stations. Moving across to the proposal 1 by day, the beige bit is bits where there's change, the white bit is bits where there's no change. So for change, we'd be going down to 1 fire engine at West Denton during the day, and at Newcastle Central, replacing 1 fire engine with 1 of the new smaller appliances, because that's where there are a lot of low-risk fires. Moving on into the evening, we would have a fire engine and a smaller appliance at both West Denton and Newcastle Central, and the others would stay the same. And then by night, this is when we start to stand some things down. We'd go down to 1 at West Denton, 1 plus a smaller appliance at Newcastle, 1 at Gosforth, and Biker would stay the same. Under options 2 and 3, this would have a slightly different impact. Again, the status quo is 8. I've left Wallsend on at the bottom, obviously that's in North Tyneside. That would mean that at West Denton there would be no change by day and by evening, although we would stand down an appliance at night. The change at Newcastle Central would be the same. Gosforth would close, Biker would stay the same, and the new station would have 2 appliances by day, 2 appliances in a smaller vehicle by evening, and 2 appliances at night. And I hope that makes sense, because I've gone through that very quickly. Overall impact we've had modelled using a workload modelling tool. What you can see here is that for higher risk incidents, the purple line at the top is the status quo. Option 1 actually allows us to respond pretty much as quickly to pretty much as many incidents that are high risk as we do now. Options 2 and 3, not quite as good. However, we would still be getting to the vast majority of high-risk incidents in between 4 and 6 minutes, which is still very acceptable performance compared to other parts of the country. And then this is the graph for the low risk incidents. You can see that here, under all three of the options, we would be slower than the status quo, and that's deliberate, because what we're actually trying to do with these options is protect our response to the high risk by accepting a slower response to low risk. And that's a way that we found of saving the money whilst maintaining a very, very good response to high risk incidents that people have come to expect. Finally, the options to change are complex. I have made them sound simple and straightforward, but if we do implement these things, there will be a lot of internal procedure and policy changes, and we need to make sure that the whole thing's done in a way that, as I say, is cautious and always puts the safety of the community and the firefighters first. So I think really I'll stop there. I hope I haven't gone too far over my 10 minutes. And I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Questions? Sorry, can we have questions, please, and not statements? Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you very much, Joy. I have the pleasure of being a Gosforth councillor and councillor for the area where you're going to potentially close the station. If I were to believe the Evening Chronicle and indeed the press reports, this is a done deal and you've determined to close this station already. Will you please make a statement to the effect that this is still an open discussion and you haven't actually determined what the future of the station will be?
Absolutely. This is a genuine consultation. When the members of the Fire Authority were asked what they wanted to consult upon, they wanted to consult upon all three of the options. And we are in the middle of public meetings talking to people to get their views about the options. We're talking to staff, we're talking to partners, and it certainly isn't a done deal. The decision will be made after the consultation period's closed.
Councillor Woodcock.
Good evening, Joe. Good to see you again after my sojourn on the Fire Authority a few years ago. You did make mention in the report there about false alarms. I seem to recall there was a difference between malicious false alarms called in and, for example, Eldon Square, where there was automatic fire alarms which were going off, and that there was some work being done at that time. Now, obviously, I've not been so involved over the last couple of years for a variety of reasons, but what progress has there been on the automatic, and on the other as well? The other point is a question I sort of know the answer to anyway. You're saying about the integrated risk management plan. That's been around for a few years, and my understanding of it was supposed to be a virtuous circle of improving the response that the fire service gave over time. I just want a bit more clarity about how that is the backdrop to how the service operates. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. So on false alarms, it's quite correct. We measure malicious false alarms and we measure automatic false alarms. We've driven down malicious false alarms quite a lot, perhaps since you were on the Fire Authority, by increasing our what we call challenge. So our control staff are trained to identify people who may be being malicious. And that has been actually quite effective. We have reduced those a lot. Obviously, if in doubt, we'd still go, because, you know, if in doubt, you go, don't you? But in terms of automatic false alarms, again, we've done quite a lot of work, particularly with frequent offenders like Eldon Square, like hospitals. When I say offenders, they're not doing it deliberately, it's just the nature of the building. The staffs at those centres are very keen to drive down automatic false alarms because it affects their business. So we've made some progress, but we still have far too many, as you can see on the chart. The thing about integrated risk management, basically for fire, we are expected to manage change in a way that balances risk and resource in a very explicit way, which is not the same as for some other public services. And it is about any change that you make shouldn't increase risk and should ideally increase performance. And certainly, you know, hopefully you'll see from those charts, incidents have been driven down. We have been reducing risk. We have been reducing incidents. We still are, even in these straitened financial times, we are still improving, and we do want to improve, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to do so. Yeah.
Councillor Sutcliffe.
Firstly, thank you very much for speaking to us, and the information was quite helpful. I'd like to ask, is there anything we can do as sort of community representative and leaders to help with the reductions in false alarms, which seem to be a significant budget constraint, sort of passing in information, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly it depends in a way what your makeup of your local community is, but in terms of the local populace, I think there is always a role for councillors in reducing malicious false alarms still more than currently, because I think some people just think it's a laugh. And first of all, it does waste our resources when we haven't got them to waste. And I know that argument isn't going to cut any ice with people who think it's a laugh. But also, it means that, you know, a fire engine might get delayed from going to something that actually needs it. So that would be really helpful. I think the other side of things, if you do happen to have a big hospital or some other large business in your patch, any messages that you ever get a chance to put across about trying to change the systems to avoid false alarms would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Keane.
Thanks for my questions being answered.
Right. Councillor Stokes-Walker.
Your response, average response time of finance for what you was pretty impressive. What are the effects of the 3 objects on your response time?
I can't get it back up on the screen, but we showed on the graph that for high-risk incidents, the option 1 doesn't have a huge impact on the response time overall, and options 2 and 3 have a slightly greater impact, but that the majority of incidents would still be got to within 4 to 6 minutes. That's a 4 to 6 minute band. That's sort of under the average response time. There's obviously a sort of tail of incidents, which there is currently as well, that take longer than that, because it's sometimes just to do with what the roads are like where you're going, and, you know, is it a rural area and things like that. But luckily, we don't have too many rural areas in Tyne and Wear. So, does that answer the question?
It does. The reason I was asking was, for example, for that tail.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, that's it. Thank you very much, Joy, for your time tonight. Nice to see you again. Item 8 on the agenda is a Newburn culvert collapse. Call on Councillor Cott to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I'm very pleased to introduce this report to Council. It has taken a lot of preparation and it's involved a lot of discussion. Thanks to all the members who were involved in that process. And thanks to all the agencies and also a number of council officers who have given support to this process. And I think what's come together is a really comprehensive and detailed report related to the issues to do with the Newburn culvert collapse and also the extreme flooding that we had last year. So I'm really pleased that it's come to Council, because I think a number of members here will want to discuss, debate some of the issues, will want to raise issues that are pertinent to them and their wards, and it'd be useful to give them some time to do that. But just wanted to comment on a few of the provisions within the report. I think generally speaking, in terms of the response from the agencies involved, I think we were really impressed with what had been achieved, and I think that has to go on record. There were obviously there was also scope for improvement. We have come up with a number of recommendations about how things could be changed to be done differently in the future, particularly in the context of budget reductions, which will have an impact on the ability to deliver services. But in terms of review, there are a number of things that we've looked at. One I'll pick out in particular is rest centre policy. The particular issue around the Newburn culvert collapse and the provision that was made available there. I think that's important in terms of respecting people's dignity and also the fact that they could be traumatised by their experiences. We also have to look at this in the context of asset management changes, because a lot of premises may not be available anymore to us, or maybe the character of how they can be made available will change. So that's quite important. We feel that there's lines of communication which have to be improved, particularly actually working with elected members, both cabinet members and ward members across the city. And we also think that it's really important to look at mainstreaming resilience policy and the monitoring of, and we need to think also very carefully about the monitoring of the impact of budget reductions, particularly on environmental services, gully maintenance and those kinds of things. We think partnership is very critical. We think the council should be exercising its leadership role, bringing agencies together, and in fact a number of the agencies actually commented to us about how important it was that the council had a role in bringing people together, bringing agencies together to make sure that we have the best services available. And we want to see more collective working. There are a number of issues around when there are liabilities, legal issues, which sometimes get in the way of good working. Some other things get in the way of good working, handover arrangements during different stages of emergencies. We think there could be a bit more planning around some of those things. And clearer structures. So one of the things that we came across was that sometimes it appeared that there were a lot of very critical individuals from various agencies who were involved, particularly the council actually. And what happens if they left? What would happen? And it's really important that there's a focus on the response, the structures in place, as opposed to the individuals. We've looked at issues and impacts on communities. We've looked at issues to do with how we can advise residents better about flood risk, and telling them the level of response they should expect from public services like the council. We've discussed issues to do with the vulnerability of people, and the agencies need to be working collaboratively to ensure that particular vulnerable people are thought about in flooding instances and other instances like, situations like culvert collapses, but many other emergency situations. We want to encourage the development of flood warden scheme. We think there should be more consideration about planning, particularly around SPGs, and so that planning decisions will be better in the future based on issues to do with flooding. We think that there's an insurance scheme which seems to work very well that YHN operates, and that's for vulnerable people who are vulnerable to risk of flooding. Maybe they find it difficult to make provision on their own. We would like the City Council to consider those things. And we also think there's a role for central government. We were quite concerned about the threshold for the Bellwyn scheme to allow for capital works, and we think the government should be looking at lowering the threshold and also providing incentives to people as well to guard their properties against flood risk. So we've asked for Cabinet to report back in 2 months with an action plan, and we will be monitoring this through the scrutiny process. We're hoping the other agencies will do so too. And one more point just to say is we're hoping that might be done through the Resilience Forum, but I think that was going to be looked at outside the auspices of this meeting, so I'm not sure there's any progress on that, but that's basically what I would like to say. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think the councillors involved in this group have done an awful lot of good work, and they've come up with an excellent report with a number of key recommendations. I think the point that comes out most to me in this report is the importance of communication, and it's an issue that's seen throughout the report. It's not just between partners, but also with local councillors, with residents affected by the floods, other residents who just want to be able to help. And there was even an interesting comment on training journalists so that they would be able to help better disseminating information. And that's really what it's about, is sharing intelligence and the rapid dissemination of information during an incident. I would also support the improved training for councillors, and I would recommend that perhaps we get somebody from the Emergency Planning College to carry out that training. I went down there for a couple of days when I was the executive member responsible for resilience planning, and I found that extremely helpful and extremely interesting, and I would hope that they might be willing to help with some general training for all councillors. It's obviously important to keep residents who are likely to be affected informed of any planned work being carried out by Northumbria Water or others that will help, to reassure them that there will be continued gully clearance, and also letting them know what measures they can take themselves to reduce risk. And I know that a lot of that has gone on, but it's certainly very important to continue that work.
And for the council, it's crucial to build in resilience to any policy development so that everything is designed to be flood-proof wherever possible, and that we build in adaptation to climate change to any work that we do. I also wanted to comment on the rest centres. I was actually on a train coming back from London on the night of the floods last year, and I missed a lot of it, but two issues came to mind when I thought about what happened afterwards. I arrived in Newcastle and promptly drove up to the area I knew might be most affected in my ward, where, sure enough, houses were flooded for the second time in 5 years, including a couple of ladies in their 90s who lived alone, and the neighbours were being very helpful. But it did occur to me that it would have been very difficult to evacuate people to the rest centres. Even at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, there was complete gridlock on the roads, and I'd actually walked a considerable distance to just get to that area to help out. But there were also people who were on the train that I was on who wanted to get further and were unable to do so because there'd been a landslide north of Newcastle. And I do think we need to think about having some sort of information at areas like the central station or bus stations to tell people who get stuck in the city who don't live here what they can do, perhaps a list of hotels that have rooms available, any other support that they might need. So I think there's an awful lot of good things in this report. I look forward to hearing what Cabinet have to say, and I also look forward to hearing what the other partners have to say about the report and what they think they could do to help.
Councillor Forbes.
Lord Mayor, I know Councillor Stevenson, had she been here this evening, wanted to say a few words about this report, and unfortunately she's been struck down with the lurgy, so I thought on behalf of Cabinet I would make a few comments and say what's going to happen next. Firstly, I think, as the report itself comments upon, the response to the extreme flooding, and particularly at Newburn, but not just exclusively at Newburn, all around the city, showed, in my view, public service in this city at its absolute best. It showed people going beyond the call of duty. It showed people working tirelessly right the way throughout the night and well into the next day to do things which were in response to an extraordinary set of circumstances which nobody could have predicted. And I think, firstly, Council should express its huge debt of gratitude to all of those people who made such an extraordinary contribution that night. I remember going up to the roundabout just up from where I lived at the junction of the Coast Road and Chillingham Road, and seeing submerged cars. And just at that time, council staff arrived to start clearing up the mess, and within 2 or 3 hours, the road was clear and open again. They worked right the way throughout the night to open it. I also remember going up to Spencer Court, the block of flats in Newburn that made the national news, and stood in the garden at Spencer Court looking with astonishment at the way that the ground had just been washed away in front of it. 36 hours later, the entire garden that I'd been stood on had been washed away as well. And so the events were just absolutely astonishing. It's also really important, and I think this does come out to a certain extent in the report, but it's also really important to sound a warning note around the findings here, because it's very clear that it was partly the fact that the council was able to harness its resources in such a way because we directly employ people. We haven't outsourced people in different ways to different contracts, and so we didn't have to negotiate lots of strange contractual arrangements to get people to come in and help. But also, there's something about simply the ability of the council to respond to such events like this in the future, given that the budget cuts place such severe constraints on what the council will be able to achieve in the future. And I'm particularly concerned that an impact of the government's cuts will be the loss of people who've worked here for a good number of years, who just have the life experience to be able to deal with events of this kind of nature. And finally, Lord Mayor, I would just comment upon and reiterate, as Councillor Taylor's talked about, the importance of communication, but also the huge value and significance of social media in this kind of incident, because that's where people instinctively start to look for their information. And I think it's beholden on us as a council to make sure that we're properly geared up, not just to do the practical work on the ground, but also to advise and inform people of what they can do to help and how they can move around the city at a really difficult time. And the Cabinet will be looking in great detail at the recommendations, and working them through. I know a number, virtually, having read the report through, I know that quite a lot of work has gone on around the recommendations already, and so I suspect quite a lot of them are already being met in one form or another in terms of activity. But Cabinet does commit to looking thoroughly at the report and reporting back to scrutiny on what we're intending to do to meet the outcome of the recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Woodwick.
Yes, Lord, just in part reiterate what Councillor Forbes has said about the great resilience, community resilience shown both by private individuals but also by council officers in my neck of the woods in Brandon Park, where I think we've seen what has happened on a wider scale, people learning from the not mistakes, but from the processes that have taken place with these extreme events. My only criticism of the report is, if you don't live in Newburn, that's not expressly put. It's there, it's said, and the great strides forward that the council is making on in our particular area. I just prefer myself to be more expressly put for not just Brandon Park, but other areas of the city outside of Newburn.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I just want to pay tribute really to the people who've been involved in this scrutiny task and finish group. I think it's a really detailed, comprehensive report. And I think Councillor Cott thanked the partners who were involved in supporting the work of the members of that task and finish group. And I think we also need to acknowledge the residents as well who gave up their time. And actually, I think we spent a whole day, didn't we, with officers meeting with residents and hearing their views about the impact of a Thunder Thursday as it became to be known. I think if Councillor Stevenson were here, Lord Mayor, she would be very clear, as Leader of Council has said, that this wasn't just about flooding, it was the culvert collapse, and we need to be really clear about that because of the insurance implications. I think the report is very clear about the Council's role and its kind of overview role, its ability to work with partners to make sure that the resilience planning means that the way that we work means that emergencies can be dealt with really quickly. And I think Councillor Cotton, Leader of Council, have already raised the issue of communication. And I think Councillor Taylor mentioned how important it was to ensure that members know about what's going on. And I think over that period of time on Thunder Thursday, the most valuable information we had was on the council's website, which I think the staff team were fantastic in making sure was kept up to date, so that actually if you could access the council's website from wherever you were across the city, you could find out exactly how you could get home. And for some of us that was quite tricky because we had to do massive circuits of the city centre in order to get home, but the council website was actually spot on and up to date. And I think, Lord Mayor, echoing what the Leader of Council has said, our Twitter account is fantastic now because those people who follow us can be reassured that we're providing that up-to-date information, and it will become part of our response in future, which is just automatic and part of the way that we work. I think the other issue, Lord Mayor, that I think the report clarifies in some detail is the cost, the impact in terms of the cost to the city of the floods that day. And it's really difficult when actually the council, even though we've got all of that evidence, we had major impact across the city in a range of wards, as Councillor Woodwick has said, and yet we weren't able to access the government grant support, which I think is pretty terrible and is one of the things we need to go to government to challenge them on, to make sure that actually cities like ours that are massively impacted upon by these kinds of extreme events, we've got a positive response to make. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I remember that day very well because I cleverly decided to go for a ride on my bike. And I remember very clearly the sky going dark green, the birds stopping singing, and the streetlights coming on. And I'm not a religious man, Lord Mayor, but I was expecting 4 horsemen to turn up at any moment. You know, I don't want to criticise the report because it was mainly focused on Newburn, but there is a big problem across, and there will be a big problem across the rest of the city. One of the routes I could have taken home, I should say I hid in a pub for at least an hour, on my bike afterwards was along Ousburn Road. Now, I'm not sure if people are aware, but the the water ran down through Heaton Park, hit the corner of the wall, and if those of you know the sort of 10, 12 foot tall stone wall along Oosburn Road, sent it flying right the way across the road, through the allotment fence on the other side, and down into the allotments. If anybody had been driving or cycling down there, they could well have been killed. And just down the river a little bit over the culvert on that side, despite it only being about 100 metres across, the water managed to cut a groove about a metre across, a metre down, and take out a couple of trees and a section of path. And again, that could have caused loss of life if people had been about. And we have the landslide in Jesmondine as well. And what I'm sort of coming to is we're going to have to expect the unexpected, because a lot of these very intensive impacts can be very, very local, and you can't predict them. It's clear that water has never done that in Heaton Park before, in the history of Heaton Park, or else we would have seen repairs to the wall before. In fact, we had 2 100-year incidences that summer, and anybody who doubts the impact of climate change, now is the time to open your eyes, because we're just going to see more and more of this. I'm sorry if that sounds a little bit downbeat, because I always try and be upbeat in environmental issues, but I'm afraid we're going to have to expect more of this. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
And last speaker on this is Councillor Franks.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to say something both as Ward Councillor for Newburn Ward and also as a member of the committee that looked into what happened there. I must stress again how admirable the response was by council officers immediately on the scene in the worst of conditions in the middle of the night, when, without stopping to say, is it our responsibility, what do we have to do, they just got on with it. And even last week, residents stressed time and again how grateful they were for the upfront, honest response of council officers involved, and Mick Murphy in particular. Again, residents last week named Mick as fronting the whole engineering operation and being straight and honest with people, which they were grateful for, when others were maybe not really being quite so upfront. So I'll stress again, and the residents will not forget that. But the other thing in looking into this, I was very struck by how big a difference individual residents and landlords can make to stopping problems arising. The Newburn problem was created by the collapse of a culvert. There are culverts all over the city on land owned by different people, residents underneath people's houses. And there's nothing we can do in law to make them, keep them safe. But we've got to pick up the pieces when they collapse, and we've seen the mayhem that can happen when they do collapse. So I was very struck with that, and I was also very struck with the difference that can be made, again, by just individual residents doing certain things. People concreting over their gardens so that the water doesn't run away. Well, it's all right if one person does it, but if house after house after house does it, it makes a difference to our ability to get rid of water. Looking at drains, keeping gullies clear, and I think it's very, very important that we run a campaign to make people aware of how important it is that they take individual responsibility for certain things. We know that climate change is going to make flooding more and more likely, and individuals, the combined action of individuals just taking precautions will make a big difference to how we cope with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cott, got the right to reply there?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you to members for all their very pertinent points. Just a few things just to pick up on. I won't deal with them all, but that's not to say they're not important. There's just a few things that occur to me. I think it's really pertinent, Councillor Forbes' point about the impact of reduced budgets. I think that's really serious. And I think it's important that we look at a discussion with central government around some of these issues, particularly around the impact of, or the inability to actually gain the capital from the Bellwyn scheme. Not only in Newcastle do we have a lot of vulnerable people who need our support, we also, as a regional capital, attract a number of people into the city, and much of the evidence, or a lot of the evidence we took, was actually about the whole impact that, you know, having a sort of travel to work area has in all of this as well. So I think all of that needs to be thought about. There were some interesting issues made. There was a couple of interesting comments around Newburn vis-a-vis the flooding issues, and I'll answer that by saying I think that our remit was very much to look at both. And it was actually interesting, although they were two separate issues, in terms of the response, in terms of how the council and other agencies need to deal with extreme events, there was quite a lot of commonality. And it raised a whole lot of questions, not only about flooding, not only about culvert collapses, but what about other extreme events that might happen? There could be other events that occurred, hopefully not, but how would the council respond in those events, and how would agencies respond in those events? So I think they actually worked quite well together. And I think we did try to get a balance between the discussion of Newburn and the flooding issues, and I hope that we did, because a lot of the information about localities like the issues mentioned by members here was actually drawn from information that the council had kept about the nature of particular flooding events that occurred in parts of the city, and also taken from that evidence base that Councillor McCarthy noted from residents who contributed directly to our discussions. Interesting points were raised about training for members. I think that is very significant, and I think there's a lot of work that we can do in local communities to actually inform residents about things that they could be doing. I know certainly in my own community I try to do that, but I think that training would help with that. And I think that the most important thing of all is to realise that extreme events are everybody's business. It's not just for the resilience team. The whole authority, all organisations have to be building in responses, and I think a lot of the comments tonight relate to some of those things as well. So no doubt we'll be hearing more about some of the issues in the report, and I'm looking forward through scrutiny monitoring the progress, but hearing back from Cabinet and the agencies as well about how they're going to deal with the issues that we've presented to them. So thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Does Council agree to receive the report? Item 9 on the agenda is the mid-year Treasury Management Review. Call on Councillor McCarthy to move the report.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. This report is our half-yearly position in 2013-14. As we have to do, we have to present half-yearly information, builds on the information that we received in March of this year. Lord Mayor, today's report is a technical report really, but it shows the best position that the Council has been in for many years. You know, it does highlight and offer the opportunity really to update our spend and our investments as a local authority. As colleagues will see from pages 34 and 35, we're borrowing less at the moment. We're spending some of our reserves because the interest rates are very low at the moment, and as we're earning so little interest and the cost of borrowing is quite low as well, we're investing as much as we can to ensure that we're creating jobs, achieving our priorities, Lord Mayor. And I think it might be worth just saying something about the Co-op Bank, which is reported in here. Colleagues across the Council chamber will know that... Sorry, Nigel. Colleagues across the Council will know that the Co-op Bank have made a decision to no longer provide services for local authorities, which I think is very disappointing. I think it's very disappointing for a number of reasons, but you know, I think those of us on this side of the Council chamber certainly support its kind of ethical values. But to reassure colleagues across the Council, we're working with neighbouring local authorities to try and procure a bank that we could all work with. and actually that will reduce the cost of the procurement service, but actually hopefully ensure that we get a provider that we all have confidence in. I think probably, Lord Mayor, the most important part of this report is 413, which is on page 37, which clarifies the proposals, I think, very clearly and gives us assurance that we're using our resources effectively in the current climate, the current financial climate that we're in. I'm happy to answer any questions or in response to comments, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much.
It's to be seconded by Councillor Talbot, but unless my eyes deceive me.
Can I second it instead, Lord Mayor?
Yeah, okay. Got a question from Councillor Faulkner.
Can I thank the Deputy Leader for the report? Mostly members' eyes glaze over when we have these reports, but can I say that scrutiny is required to look at these reports and challenge these reports every 6 months or so, and has done its duty and had a pretty vigorous discussion. Sad about Co-op Bank. Sadly, for all banks now, the concept of ethical values doesn't seem to fit very well. It's a pity that it's extended to the Co-op as well. I just wonder where we can place our trust and faith in banks these days. Anyway, my question really, I just wondered if the Deputy Leader might comment on the capital expenditure position, because we keep hearing that the Council has got ambitious plans on capital. We know that capital is easier to access and deploy than revenue at the moment. We know that we just heard the interest rates are lower than they've ever been. But the report tells us that capital expenditure last year fell pretty dramatically from 170 to 111 million pounds. We heard at the Cabinet meeting the other day that this year's expectation and forecast is reduced by 30 million pounds already, and that we're running at less than the point that we should be mid-year on capital expenditure. So I just wondered if the Deputy Leader might tell the Council what the current situation might be on capital expenditure.
No more questions there? Councillor McCartney?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I mean, Councillor Faulkner knows absolutely that he's right. We're working really hard, but unfortunately, as we've seen in previous years, the things that we outline aren't always deliverable, and we need to make sure that we're getting the very best investments with the money that we have access to. I'm sure that we will pick up pace. We always pick up pace in the second half of the year. That's just the way things work in these kind of cycles. And I know that we've got a lot of decisions over the next few weeks and months to ensure that we are investing that money. It's really important that we spend that money as we've agreed, because, as I've already said, Lord Mayor, we need that investment to support jobs across the city, and capital is one way of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Council agree with the recommendation? Item 10. Unfortunately, Councillor Dunn cannot be present tonight as she's unwell. I'll call on Councillor McCartney to introduce the report.
Lord, I think my introduction is an apology from Councillor Dunn, and ask if we can receive it, please. And can I ask if colleagues have questions in particular on this report, that we send them to Veronica in her absence? I mean, she really is unwell tonight. Thank you.
Does Council agree to receive the report? Item 11, questions by members. We have received 2 questions marked for oral reply, which under Standing Order 9A are deemed to have been put. I would have liked to invite Councillor Bell to reply to the first question, but he's not here. So I don't know what happens there. Does anybody else like to answer the question for Councillor Bell? Look, all these people putting their hands up, saying, I'll do it, I'll do it. Just defer that to the next meeting? Yes? I'd now like to invite Councillor McCartney to reply to the second question, and I know she's definitely here.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In reply to this question, I guess I need to begin by saying, Lord Mayor, that discretionary housing payments and the way we have applied those over the last 3 years is a result of some of these appalling decisions that the coalition government, of which the party opposite is a key partner, over over the last 3 years, including this year, 2 years prior to this year and this year, in 2011-12, we were allocated £108,942 and we spent every penny of it. And in 12-13, we were allocated £212,740 and we spent all of that. Lord Mayor, this year we have been allocated £685,271 and that will be fully spent, and indeed we're bidding for more. What I thought would be helpful, Lord Mayor, is to give an idea of the way that we're using discretionary housing, rather than just answer the question directly. But just a couple of examples. Oh, actually, before I do that, this year we've made 891 awards of discretionary housing payment. 711 of them have related to the bedroom tax, 53 related to the benefit cap, and there are 60 other families. I'd just like to share a couple of examples of families who have benefited from this. One family was, as a result of the benefit cap, were facing eviction. They have 7 children, subject to a weekly cap of £109, which left them with a housing benefit entitlement of 50 pence. So using discretionary housing payment to the same amount of the cap has taken them away from a worry about eviction. That family are now working with advice and support because, as colleagues across the council chamber know, we protected as far as we could that kind of crisis advice and support service to make sure that we could support these families to maintain their families and look after themselves as best as they could. They've looked at ways to improve their circumstances in order to make sure that they can deal with the problems, and the cost to the council obviously has been much reduced because rehousing that family would far outweigh what we spent in terms of discretionary housing payment. I'd like to share another one that actually came to me as a query, and it was about a couple where the male partner has a mental health problem and has mood swings, and when he's in a particular kind of mood, he can be violent. So YHN, the housing provider, has given that couple a safe bedroom, and we were going to then charge that couple for that safe bedroom, which does seem a little strange since we've done it, and it's in order to help that couple live together. And as you can imagine, that would again be a massive cost because we'd probably have to put those 2 individuals into separate housing places and would be a greater cost. So I think we're using this money as effectively as we can. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Faulkner, did you have a supplemental?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you for the answer, and even more so, thank you for the examples. Can I just ask about next year's tranche and whether the council has applied, and if so, for how much? Because my understanding is that many authorities have already applied, but that we haven't as yet. So I just wondered what the problem was.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm not sure how much we are likely to get next year, but of course we've all got huge concerns about whether that fund might be abolished, and we may well be coming to Councillor Faulkner and his colleagues to help us lobby to maintain that fund. We have applied for an additional fund for this year, and interestingly, that the note about the additional fund that was available didn't come to us. We had to go seeking it. So the Department for Work and Pensions and colleagues nationally didn't make it easy for us to know how much was available and how much additional funding we could apply for. But indeed we did find it, and we will be doing that. I'll share that information with colleagues, Lord Mayor, when we get it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bell has just entered the chamber. Councillor Bell, we're on questions by members. I'd like to invite you to reply to the first question.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and apologies for my lateness for council tonight. Unfortunately, at 6 o'clock this evening, I was still in attendance at a house fire in the west end of Newcastle. Thankfully, we managed to get the resident out of the fire, and she was being dealt with by paramedics. But I think it was because of the speedy response of 3 fire engines and the professional attendance of the paramedics that we managed to do that. So I do apologise, but I will answer this question now. Lord Mayor, if I just put the question into context for members, it's with regards the problems that's been suffered by residents, visitors and also businesses around the central station. The context I'd like to put it in is probably that it's the best example that I can give of this generation of the city, of something that happened a number of years ago, possibly when I was a young lad, and just remember the holes being dug in the ground for the metro tunnels and indeed the creation of Eldon Square. A little bit before my time was possibly something similar as well, when the A1 was stopped from coming down Northumberland Street and was rerouted onto the central motorway. There are going to be some problems, but I would think that to answer the point that was made by Councillor Stone, am I satisfied with? I do think that the council, in the circumstances, the council officers have acted in a responsible, professional and speedy way to deal with any problems that came about. Yes, it has caused some problems, but I do believe that we've actually taken these into account and tried to limit and remove as many of the problems that we can, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Stone, do you have a supplemental?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I thank Councillor Bell for that response, and obviously understand why he wasn't here a little while ago. I work in that area of the city. I see on a regular basis that the road network around Westgate Road, around the central station, around the cathedral and the castle area is regularly gridlocked. It is causing inconvenience for people trying to get across town. It is causing problems for the emergency services. I've seen ambulances stuck in that gridlock there on several occasions. And I also have concerns about the effect that all this standing traffic is having on air quality in the area as well. So I do recognise why the work is being done. I do still have concerns that we are creating, by the changes we've made, increased gridlock on a regular basis in that part of the city centre, and I hope that can continue to be looked at to be resolved in an appropriate way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Yes, Councillor Bell, it will be continued to be looked at in the future, but again, let's try to put this into context. We've got to remember that we're looking at nearly £5 million worth of spend down in the area, a successful regional growth fund bid, and we're looking at the possibility of jobs for the future over the next 25 years. To do this, we've got to actually create the infrastructure in the area that's going to be right for the future and the next generations of the city. And it may come with some small inconvenience, but as long as we're willing to address them small inconveniences and try to keep the city flowing, I think the long-term aspirations of this council will be seen, and it will be a much better area. Some of the examples that we've tried to do, the officers have tried to do, to facilitate the work at the station, revise the station taxi operations to the east of the portico, requiring new exit points onto Neville Street immediately east of the portico, short stay parking and pick-up point drop off to the west of the portico, requiring new access points off Neville Street immediately west of the portico, safe working space around the portico, requiring the removal of Neville Street Service Road. The initial implementation of this did cause some problems. Officers were quick to react. They talked to the businesses, they talked to the ward members, talked to myself, and I think that we've actually been able to come with a compromise. But it is a moving feast, and as the work continues, officers are having to readdress, and they are trying to keep the city moving, but again, trying to build a city that's going to be fit for the future and try to get these jobs back to Newcastle, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. We have also received 6 questions marked for written reply. These, together with the responses, have been circulated and also displayed in the foyer. Item 12 is the Cabinet Member report. As mentioned, Councillor Dunn is not well and has asked that her Cabinet Member report be deferred this evening. It's proposed that the report will come back to a future meeting. 13 appointments. Are the appointments agreed as set out? Item 14, notice of motion. Local Government Association.
Can I just ask about the Cabinet report? I know Councillor Dunn isn't here, but will she be bringing it to January Council? Because I really do think that executive members should respond to Council directly at least once a year.
All it says it will come back to a future meeting. That's all I've got on, yeah. 14, the Local Government Association's Rewiring Public Services campaign. Call on Councillor Faulkner in Councillor Anita Lower's absence to move the motion, seconded by Councillor Cott.
Thank you, Lord Mayor and Council, for letting me move the motion. Anita's still recuperating from a fairly major operation she's had. Lord Mayor, what a shame. What a shame, really, that it's been left to us to bring this motion to Council. And what a shame that the Leader of Council, instead of showing some sort of statesman-like leadership, has managed to turn it into yet another anti-government tirade, as seems to be his way of dealing with these. I'll deal with the substance of the amendment in my response to the debate as a whole when we hear what he has to say. It is a national campaign by the Local Government Association. It was launched at the annual conference in the summer. The leader was there, I was there. It was supported by all parties. They asked councils to take motions and reports to their own councils to give the issues an airing. So we're all wondering, you know, why is this Labour Council not done so? Why has it been this Liberal Democrat opposition who's had to provide the motion to generate debate? What do we conclude from that? Maybe it's because that, in a way, the very fact that we're having to have this debate and the LGA is having to run this campaign recognises the need for radical change in the relationship between central and local government to admit the failures of, in particular, I have to say, the 13 years of Labour government, 13 years of top-down command and control as far as local government was concerned. So it's a timely campaign, it's a timely motion, I hope Council thinks, about reversing what is probably the most centralised system of government in Europe. And the Scots and the Welsh have got more say over their affairs and their money than the English have, and the Scots may end up with more, of course, quite soon. This really has got to end. Let's not get carried away that it's just about the money. Local government would have faced absolutely huge cuts even if Labour had won the last election, and you know that. The motion actually already calls for the reinstatement of fair financial distribution to councils, a cause that we've argued and championed in this chamber since before Labour took control of the City Council. It's everybody's issue in local government, not just one for Labour to try and claim as their own. But there were 13 years of opportunity to reform local government finance. Councillor Beecham used to talk eloquently about this in his LGA days, but of course nothing happened. It could have been simpler, it could have been fairer than it is now, and it isn't. And the opportunity to bring in new financial flexibility, such as municipal bonds, was there, but that didn't come. And they had 13 years to scrap the Barnett formula, but they didn't because of how much they depend on the Scottish seats. So all that's a shame. Central government departments grew under Labour, and really they do need to be cut back much more sharply now. Why is local government taking bigger hits than central government? Those Whitehall silos are still there, operating in some cases worse than ever. And I really do think that they need to merge and reduce central government departments, and certainly from this city's point of view, and maybe local government generally, I think it would be terrific if many of the functions of the DWP could be actually devolved to local authorities, so we could begin to have some real influence on the employment and skills debate in particular. But at the heart of it, this campaign's about revitalising local democracy through empowering local government and transforming local services through leadership and accountability. And the coalition government has started with this localism agenda, returning business rates to local government with city deals, with retention of business rate growth, with combined authority leverage on £2 billion a year of infrastructure spend, with return of public health to local government, and getting rid of quite a lot of unelected quangos, of incessant audits and inspections and centrally imposed targets and ring-fence funding. Even you must be pleased to see the back of all of that. And of course it's had to be done when we all know much less money as a whole is available. And I think, you know, as far as devolution is concerned, that's something to celebrate, but it's nowhere near enough, and we must move further. And I think the campaign of the LGA in this motion tells us the direction in which we need to move. I really do wonder whether a Labour government would have done the same in current circumstances. I rather think you know and we know what would have happened. But even Councillor Forbes, bless him, in his franker moments, he made a speech, I remember, at his party conference, where he actually said, assuming it was reported correctly, that coalition ministers were more willing to devolve power to local authorities than his own party. So if we're all agreed with the campaign, and I rather think we are, why not tear up your rather sour and partisan amendment and support the motion?
Councillor Cott.
I'd like to second the motion and reserve the right to speak.
Now call on Councillor Forbes to move an amendment, seconded by Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and can I start by sending my best wishes to Councillor Anita Lower, we miss her very much on this side of the chamber, and I hope she's back soon. Councillor Faulkner has very quickly got out of the loop since he stopped being leader of the council and stopped being leader of the opposition, he doesn't really understand all of the things that we're doing around the devolution agenda. He's talking a lot about things that need to happen without understanding that in many cases they're already happening. Take, for example, the Cabinet report on the future of local government that went through Cabinet a few months back. That sets out a clear and positive vision for what local government should be in the future, completely contrary to what this current government's view of local government is in the future, which is simply an outsourced model of contracting. We want a much more positive way of delivering local services in partnership with local communities. And he talks about the Secretary of State, our beloved Secretary of State for Local Government and Communities, who seems to me to be entirely obsessed with micromanaging local authorities. Far from devolving things, he's written to me over the last couple of years telling me that we need to have at least one bandstand in the city, telling me that we need to act to regulate the noise of ice cream vans in the city. These are hardly great issues facing the communities of the city and hardly dealing with the major challenges that we have today. Where I do agree with Councillor Faulkner is that I think it is shameful that cities in England have fewer financial flexibilities than cities in China, and we do not have the same abilities to determine our own affairs in the same way. And so I am part of the campaign that's being run by core cities to do more to devolve powers and responsibilities from central government to the major cities of England. That process began with the city deals, and I negotiated a city deal which I think represents a very good deal for this city, and it starts us along the path of devolution and reform. The next step is the combined authority, and we know that the 7 local authorities of Tyne and Wear plus Durham and Northumberland are working to establish a combined authority for our area, partly as a skeleton around which more can be devolved to us. And isn't it a shame that yet again the Secretary of State seeks to put hurdles in our way to achieving that, just when it's within our grasp? And I think the Secretary of State should be ashamed for the way in which he's trying to play small-town politics with a major issue like that. The opportunity that is there for us to seize on the skills agenda and have more control over the skills that we see in our city and the skills that we need for the future of our economy. And the work that we're doing around economic growth can't happen in isolation. It needs to happen alongside public sector reform. And so the cities of England are best placed to determine how the work programme should work in the future. Our offer to the current government and to the next is to take on responsibility for commissioning the work programme, because we know how best to reach the people who are out of work at the moment. We've shown that we can do it through the youth contract, we can do it through the work programme too. And in health and social care, we're doing innovative work around the integration of health and social care, making sure that the system is joined up around the needs of individuals and their carers, and making sure that we get better efficiencies out of the existing resources. But we cannot ignore the very real situation that we face in local government today, which is we are at the butt end of punitive and damaging cuts being imposed on us by the Tory Lib Dem coalition government. There is no escaping that. Councillor Faulkner has on many occasions agreed with me that that is the situation. And until we get that point across to government, our future is at risk, not just as a provider of services, but as the skeleton round which the future devolutionary settlement will be built and agreed. So it's absolutely vital that we show that we have a positive approach here, that we are willing to engage with government. I think the fact that I've just negotiated £4.5 million worth of funding from central government to help young unemployed people is a good example of this council's ability to work with a government of a different complexion. But there is more that we need to do. There is more that we need to do, and there is more that we need from government in order to do it. And so what we'll continue to do is put pressure on for that reform. The Local Government Association Rewiring Public Services is a good start. But I think in Newcastle we can go further, faster. We can be the pioneering council that makes the real difference in terms of devolutionary settlements. We want to be the first in the country, the most progressive in the country at achieving this. And with the council leadership at the moment, we are quite a long way to doing it. What we need is government action to back that, not just government action, but support from the current opposition to achieve that. And with the support of both, we will, I think, achieve great things for the future of this city. So, Lord Mayor, let nobody be in any doubt about the capacity, the appetite and the vision for public sector reform and devolution that we have on this side of the chamber. And that's why it's absolutely important that people support the principles set out in the amendment, which I think take us a lot further forward around this agenda than the original motion does.
Councillor McCarthy.
Mayor, can I second to reserve the right to speak in the debate? Thank you.
Any questions? Right. Councillor McCartney, you reserve the right to speak. That was quick. Funnily enough, yes, there is.
There is. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I think I'll just add a few comments to those of the Leader of Council on our amendment, Lord Mayor. I think the position, the starting point for this, and actually I think is the starting point for the original motion, is that the government talks about localism, but actually it has centralised a huge number of areas of work. And what we want to do is take more control over things that we know more about than those in Whitehall. And there are real problems around local accountability, and we need to address that. And it is us that are out there talking to our residents and hearing from them and knowing how best to support them and provide what I think are high-quality public services that meet their needs. I think, Lord Mayor, that I think it's been quite interesting watching the way the debate is forming in Scotland, and I think we'll have an interesting few months listening to the way things are being described. And being so close to the border, I think lots of people in the North East will be really, really interested in what's going on across the border from us. And I think what we will learn quite a lot from what people are saying. And I don't mean the politicians, but I mean ordinary people and those who want to actually talk about the real issues that affect them and not about who controls what. I do think that a significant number of the things the Leader of Council has referred to, particularly the combined authority, bringing opportunities for skills for our, particularly for young people, but jobs for people of all ages, and actually the investment that will bring has huge potential. But I think to actually get to that has been really, really hard work. And of course the recent hurdle that's been thrown our way about consultation that the Secretary of State has demanded from us, is just yet another hurdle. No other combined authorities had to do that, but apparently we in the north of the North East, although we're called our 7 areas, Tyne-Wear, Northumberland and Durham, the way that that is being taken forward, I think, is pretty disgraceful. The youth contract investment, I think the bringing of that money, the working with neighbouring authorities, I think those examples are really, really good examples of what we've tried to do to bring those decisions closer to home. So I think, Lord Mayor, we are obviously in support of this campaign. We will do our best. We've already had a number of discussions about this in Cabinet, and I think what the government are doing is, as the amendment says, dangerous and damaging to the city, and we need to tell the Secretary of State that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Cott, you reserve the right to speak.
Yes, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much. Yeah, just a few points. I was very interested in the comments that came forward. One thing I get, the impression I get, it might be interesting to try and clarify this in the Chamber tonight, but I get the impression that the current administration isn't very fond of the LGA at all. It prefers to work very much in the core cities group, where it feels the flavour of opinion is more orientated towards the political ideas of the current administration. And I think behind that, there was discussion some months ago about whether the council was indeed likely to pull out of the LGA altogether. And I was quite worried about that, because the LGA is the body that represents local government, and it's a way of keeping local government together. So about rewiring local government, well, you have to wire it in the first place. You have to all be collectively working together, and the LGA does a marvellous job in so many different ways in representing local government. And when I saw the provisions in this rewiring public services approach, I was quite attracted by this. I'm not saying that the council is not looking to deal with the adverse circumstances that it finds itself in. It is adapting to those circumstances. Some of the choices it is making I agree with, other choices I don't agree with. But I do think there's an opportunity here to actually take advice and to work alongside the LGA to actually deliver things in a way which enables the Council to move forward. A number of the ways in which the Council is moving forward, it's quite interesting to know, actually come because of central government. Central government has reduced funding, but it is an enabler in many senses. There are many projects, there are many capital projects and revenue projects which the Council is involved in, which come from central government and are helping to transform services. You can think of a couple offhand. There's, of course, the Troubled Families project that comes through central government. That's helping the Council to pull together a way of working to support vulnerable children and young people. And, of course, there's this bid for Better Start, which, again, is another means by which central government is offering support. However, I think it needs to go a lot deeper than that. And I think there are some real issues that you could say, in a sense, there's a potential for a crisis of local government, where local government becomes disengaged from voters because voters don't feel that local government is able to achieve anything. And I'm very much of a point of view that decisions should be made at the lowest possible level of decision making. And I believe that in this approach, there's many things that I can support in terms of what can be achieved if national government gives to local government more of an ability, more devolution to be able to do things. This is a process which has stops and starts, and I'm coming to the end, has stops and starts over the years. It's not about this particular government or the previous government or governments before that. The tendency of government is often to centralise, and local government wants a different settlement. But here we have an opportunity to act in a grown-up way and do something to enable us to move forward positively, rather than to just snipe at the government and not achieve anything. I know, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
And now call on Councillor Faulkner to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Sadly, a typically self-congratulatory and self-promoting speech by the Leader of the Council. I'd like to hear a little more we and a little less I, but there we are, that's his style, and so be it. Of course, I'm aware there was a report to Cabinet about local government. Actually, it was an extremely short and thin report, and it had the same self-congratulatory and very non-specific set of initiatives that were recorded in there that the City Council were allegedly taking. You know, the trouble is that this is about results and outcomes. It's not about initiatives and ambitions, however they might be expressed. I think it's a bizarre idea that Newcastle is actually in the forefront of new thinking in local government. It isn't, you know. I mean, you look at shared services. We're actually way behind the game on shared services. On creative and innovative thinking, yes. On slogans, we can beat anybody. Cooperative Council Union, we can beat anybody. But you don't measure progress by the number of initiatives and slogans and how often you appear in the newspapers. You measure it by outcomes for the citizens. And frankly, there's very little in the way of outcome. Combined authorities, my goodness me, we were actually ahead at one point. The government had created this opportunity, quite rightly saying you local authorities have got to work together more, because historically we've been very bad at doing it. But actually, we're beginning to lag now other urban areas. And frankly, you don't get on very well with each other, and that's one of the problems. And I think I know why. It's the elephant in the room. Why did it take you so long even to agree a chair? Actually, we're doing very badly on combined authorities. And as for consultation, you've given us 15 days. You've given the city 15 days on the website for local consultation. That's not a great deal of time. You can't complain about the government's requirements on consultation when we're only offering 15 days of consultation. There you are.
On a point of clarification, that is the government's consultation on the establishment of the combined authority, not the council's.
There are two levels of consultation, Lord Mayor. One is the government consultation. One is the one that each council individually carries out. And I'm talking about the latter, and it's 15 days of consultation. It appeared on our website on the 28th of November, comments in by the 11th of December. I don't think that's good enough. Whoever's fault it is, it's not good enough, and if we didn't say so, then we should say so. So I'm afraid This amendment, it contains the usual anti-government rhetoric. It is not all about money. We all agree the point about money and fairness. We are trying to put that to one side and have a serious debate about the way in which local government would go forward, the way in which we can maximise devolution opportunities, the way in which we can empower local government for the future. And you've pretty much blown it because you've created a situation now where we cannot support the motion because of the tone you've injected into it, whereas I think it would be much better if you'd managed to sustain and support the original motion because we seem to agree with it all, but you've blown it. Well done.
Council to vote on the amendment. Yes, 36, abstain 7, no 12. 13. I think I must have dyslexia. Right, Council to vote on the motion as amended. Yes, 36, abstain 19. Go and tell us it's moved again, the numbers. Item 15. The notice of motion is the cuts to the Tyne Fire Service. I was going to give some advice about the position of members of the Fire Authority.
Lord Mayor, I was going to give some advice about the position of the Fire Authority, but since Councillor Forbes is the only member of the Fire Authority present and he's already made his position quite clear, I will not need to give any advice about that issue.
Right, a call on Councillor McCarthy to move the motion, seconded by Councillor Powers.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I mean, I think we probably don't need to add all that much to the presentation that we heard earlier today from Joy, which I think was excellent and really very informative, and reiterated many of the issues we've raised in this notice of motion that's before us tonight. We are all really proud of our fire and rescue service. It does keep us safe. I mean, I would guess that some colleagues across the room have had cause to call them out. And, you know, they are there, they do respond quickly, and they give us the best possible support. I think it's fantastic that we've got one of the best performing fire and rescue services across the country. Sadly, like many of the rest of the parts of government away from Whitehall, they're being really hard hit by the government cuts. A significant proportion of its budget over the next couple of years. And some of the losses that I think will impact on our residents, I think the ongoing preventative work that the Fire and Rescue Service team offer, you know, their work with young people in the Young Firefighters organisation has had major impact. It's bound to have had an impact because it's been going on for so long. And I think it's really sad that places like Safety Works may no longer exist in the future, and how many children have benefited from visiting that and understanding the dangers around the home and reminding their parents to switch off, you know, pull out plugs and keep their homes safe. And I guess one of the concerns that we will all have is that, and I think the option, the way that Joy presented it tonight, maybe means that if that's the option that the Fire and Rescue Authority go for, then maybe you know, response times won't be significantly different. But of course, it's always a concern if you reduce the number of fire engines across the, you know, appliances across the area, across Tyne and Wear, then it's bound to put residents' lives at risk. It's bound to mean a less good service, although it may still be among the best in the country, but it will be less good than we've experienced. And I guess we can only speak on the experience that we've had in this area so far. think, Lord Mayor, what we're asking for is for Council to agree to write to the Secretary of State to make very clear our views about the proposed cuts, and that we respond fully to the current consultation and make sure that those views are taken into account. If I can just pick up a couple of things, Lord Mayor, I won't be supporting the amendment that's before us tonight, which I guess is not a surprise because they've taken out all of the criticisms of the government, which is, I guess, no surprise from the opposition here. And I think one of the issues that they raise, Lord Mayor, is a possibility, a proposal to merge fire and rescue authorities across the region. I mean, actually, I wouldn't disagree with the first part of the final part of their proposal around encouraging the Fire and Rescue Service to explore all feasible opportunities. I would hope they're continuing to do that, and obviously I wouldn't disagree with that. But the real problem about merger would be that Durham and Northumberland, the precept from Durham and Northumberland is much higher than we currently pay in Tyne and Wear. So we would end up, I guess, we would end up subsidising those two authorities, and actually that wouldn't be a credible position for us to be in. And I think we need to retain the we need to retain the services that we've currently got, whereas there are significant numbers of people in Northumberland and Durham where they're staffed by volunteers, and I don't think that would be the right approach for Tyne and Wear. Actually, the map that Joy had about the response times and where the fires were, I'm really pleased I live in one of those green areas where they can get to me if I need them quickly. So I think we'll be rejecting the amendment. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Powers. Now call on Councillor Woodard to move an amendment, seconded by Councillor Shepherd.
Lord Mayor, if you formally second, you do actually waive your right to speak, but I'll move on, Lord Mayor. This amendment tidies up Labour's rather naughty little number of a motion provided by Councillor McCarthy. As she says, a lot of this has already been covered by Joy's really good presentation earlier in the meeting. Let's be clear here, this motion has been a long time coming. Change for fire and rescue authorities has been happening for some time. The allusion I made to is the Integrated Risk Management Plan, the dissolution of Tyne and Wear-wide emergency planning unit, and those sort of things will continue to happen, and continue to do so. But as society does change, so inevitably there will be a need for more efficient emergency response services to respond to those changes. As another has said, the reduction in fire risk is not solely due to the actions of fire and rescue authorities. Societal changes, technological improvements, increase in smoke alarm ownership, safety campaigns and government regulations for both buildings and furniture have played a huge part. Despite those changes, no significant change in the makeup or cost of the service has taken place. Fire and rescue authorities do now need to transform themselves to reflect the entirely different era of risk and demand they now operate in. Those are the words of Sir Ken Knight earlier this year in his review of fire authorities for the Communities Department. I might not agree with him entirely. His report's a bit thin, it's a bit of a one-trick pony, but he does make that fair point. You've also got to remember that at present fire services are provided in England and Wales in a variety of ways, from standalone authorities like Tyne and Wear to subservient parts of county councils such as Essex and Suffolk. All provide a service with much disparity in how efficiently they are run, an allusion also to Northumberland County Council as well. Would amalgamation of the authority automatically really mean a drop in service? Can a larger service, universally applied, not provide economies of scale? Different answers could well be provided a few miles up and down the road. At Belmont in Durham City, there was, under the last Labour government, an attempt to amalgamate authority powers via the Regional Control Centre, a PFA programme that was an utter disaster itself rather than fighting them. Yet we saw in Glasgow in the last week another great example of work by firefighters do, day in, day out, as Jed has already done tonight. What a way to get out of answering a question. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Authority is one body covering the whole of Scotland, from Dumfries to Kirkwall, from Oban to Stonehaven. Huge area, and so far the authority does seem to be making good progress bedding in. Knight observes this is not an easy model to translate to England, as Councillor McCarthy has just alluded to, but £293 million of savings over 15 years is promised. I know this is difficult for some members of the council opposite to understand, but the way we as authorities have done things in the past, based on 1970s ways of thinking, indeed in the fire service due to 1940s way of thinking, the standards of that time, sometimes should not be a drag on innovation and efficiency in the future. Merely restating that any innovation will inevitably mean lives are lost is showing how weak other arguments must be. Too many times before that argument has been used and shown to be false. Longer response times, the greater use of on-call firefighters, opportunities for cost savings that are there but have now, up to now, failed to have been used. We all know that the budgetary cuts proposed, a real change of 8.7% this year to the Fire and Rescue Authority, is at best unhelpful. Others will perhaps use slightly stronger language, especially given the great work the authority and service has done over a number of years, as we saw earlier tonight. The amendment makes that connection between the finance and the future, yet still expresses all of our real concerns.
Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. As colleagues will know, I often stand here and present my speeches using a piece of technology. Unfortunately, iOS 7 has eaten my speech this evening, therefore it's back to paper. I think it's beholden on all of us to thank the fire officers for their work. We've had a discussion already with Joy this evening, and I think it is worth reiterating those points. We've also had the opportunity to, through scrutiny, see how the fire service work in conjunction with other agencies as a part of their role in the rescue role. And so I think it is valuable that we have these motions brought to Council to consider how funding reductions are likely to affect what is an extremely important service, given certainly that we've already heard that there are year-on-year reductions in the number of fire incidents. I think the point of the amendment, as we've already heard exactly, was simply to bring forward the idea that there was an opportunity for further cost reductions, maybe by joint working, particularly akin to the combined authority. And I appreciate that you've noticed that. It's a shame that some of the other maybe slightly narrative changes have meant that it's unable to accept that motion, but I hope that the general thrust still stands, that we believe that those changes can be improved given joint working. I must admit that there is in the amendment, you will see that it only alludes to merger as being one possible outcome rather than being a preferred outcome. I personally bear the scars of having been attempted to be forced into a police force merger, and I know that cultural and operational difficulties between police forces can make significant difficulties when trying to merge two different organisations, and I'm sure those same sorts of general cultural and operational difficulties would be equally apparent here. So I'm sorry you can't accept the amendment. The intention is very clear that what we're trying to achieve is to encourage the fire service to improve and reduce their cost base by further additional working that I'm sure we will see in any case. Again, I would encourage people to accept the amendment. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Questions? No? Right, Councillor Powers, you reserve the right to speak.
Put simply, Lord Mayor, these devastating cuts to Tyne-and-Wear Fire and Rescue Service will put more lives at risk. The service has suffered disproportionate government cuts since 2010 and will have lost 23% of its spending power. That's 13.6 million by 2016-17. We should note the service has made a commendable effort to protect operational response services, but budgetary situation has now made it unviable. The fire service is faced with reducing the operational response services unless the Secretary scales back on the cuts. And this evening we have heard it. Reducing operational response and the staff that go with it means the response times will suffer. The Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Services announced proposals to cut £5.1 million from their budget. This is the most devastating cuts in the service's history and will mean firefighters and the public will be at far greater risk if these cuts go ahead. These proposals, which include the removal of appliance from West Denton and Elswick, will dramatically reduce the level of fire and rescue cover in those parts of Newcastle, and along with the possible closure of Wallsend and Gosford, will have a significant impact on the service's ability to deal with incidents in Newcastle, North Tyneside and the western part of Tyne and Wear. Proposals have also included the removal of 6 frontline fire engines from 30 down to 24 on a permanent basis, 20% of the total fire engines, with others removed at night time. With the loss of the aerial ladder platform, cuts to crew levels across the service with a total of 131 firefighter posts, 20% of the total workforce, that's 1 in 5 staff. To put these numbers into context, less than 10 years ago, when the Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Service had a minimum number of 160 firefighters on duty, these cuts will reduce that number to 88 at night. It means in areas of Tyne and Wear will be left without cover for extended periods, again increasing the risk of both public and firefighters alike. The Fire Brigades Union said crews would try their utmost to stop lives being put at risk, but are realistic that the response times will suffer. Firefighter Chief Officer Tom Capelin recently said, unfortunately there will be an impact. We will be getting an instance more sorely, and if somebody is in a fire, we will try our utmost to get them as quickly as possible. But if 6 fire engines are removed from the area like Tyne and Wear, it will take longer to get there. This is an unnecessary risk to life and an ideological attack on public services by the party across the chamber. I support the motion which is urging the government to give a fair deal on funding to Tyne and Wear's fire and rescue services, to rethink the devastating cuts and to help the fire and rescue service keep local people as safe as possible. I reject the amendment particularly because of the merged authority proposal. I believe that the loss of control services, the widening of a control service over a wider area will reduce times for people to be able to get the fires. It will lead to a reduction in local knowledge and it will reduce response times. Again, put simply, this will put lives at risk in our city. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Now call on Councillor McCarthy to reply.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I think what I'll do, Lord Mayor, in my reply is just read out something from the independent auditors of the Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Authority. This is directly from their report, which was presented in September, I think, of this year. In our view, Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Authority will have to respond to some key challenges over the next few years. In particular, it will need to continue to respond positively in the face of the bleak economic outlook for the public sector, facing up to and addressing further cuts in funding. The authority faces the challenge of maintaining and improving service quality with fewer resources. This will become increasingly difficult as the cuts dig deeper. I think, Lord Mayor, even the independent auditors can see what a significant difference this is going to make for the local fire and rescue service. I think it's a pity that Councillor Woodick and Councillor Shepherd took out, changed disproportionately to significantly, because I think they have significantly different meanings, which is why we use the language in the first place. And I do think that, although I think I have, as I've said, Lord Mayor, have some sympathy with their third bullet point in their resolution, we couldn't agree it because their proposal, and I realise it is only one option, but their proposal potentially to merge authorities we just couldn't accept on this side of the council chamber. Thank you very much.
Council to vote on the amendment. Yes 18, abstain 1, no 34. So that amendment's lost. Council to vote on the substantive motion. Yes, 35. Abstain 18. Speaks for itself. Go on to item 16. The notice of motion is no to nuisance calls. I'll call on Councillor Stone to move the motion, seconded by Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll move over one. Lord Mayor, I hope to be quite brief in my comments. I've had regard to the amendment, which I understand is essentially supportive and friendly. The Council has had a very good record in recent years in extending no cold call zone coverage, and I'm pleased to see the officer responsible at the back there who are supporting us this evening, especially in areas which have had a primarily elderly population. In my ward, they have been very well received by residents in areas like the Bungalows part of North Heaton, on the High Heaton estate and in Cochrane Park. One incident where residents of a no cold call zone in the Ravenswood Road area alerted police to a gang of scammers, and I believe they were, as a result of that, they were arrested and jailed. So I congratulate the Trading Standards officers on their work on this campaign and hope that it can be further extended. However, my motion also seeks to look at the issue of telephone cold calling. For many people, it is an irritation of modern life to be pestered daily by marketing calls. The TPS system seems to have little impact against these calls, many of which originate from abroad or from automated machines. And for most of us, they're a nuisance, but for some, there are more troubling implications. Some use high-pressure sales techniques that can confuse vulnerable people and lead them into signing up for things they may not want or fully understand. I've had personal experience of being deluged with calls after expressing interest in the Green Deal. Some providers who have called offering me insulation and new boilers have been less than straightforward or transparent in their claims. The issue of silent calls is a particular worry to older people. It's irritating to some, but it can be sinister to those people who don't realise where these calls are coming from, particularly if it is happening frequently. So the current TPS system is well-intentioned, but not altogether effective. My party colleague Mike Crockett, who is an Edinburgh MP, is currently promoting a private members' bill which will make it easy for people to opt out of and for greater sanctions out of marketing calls, and for greater sanctions against those companies who flout the rules. Private members' bills in Parliament can be a bit of a lottery in terms of getting parliamentary time, but I hope that his proposals will receive cross-party backing and we'll get onto the statute book in due course. And I would like to point out that at least one Newcastle Labour MP, Newcastle North, Catherine McKinnell, has already supported this cause in public, and I hope that the other Newcastle MPs will follow suit. A final comment about the Council. I know the Council has done very good work on the physical no cold caller zones, and I've commended officers for their work. But I would also like to make Council aware that I have received a complaint from a constituent who is TPS registered, who was rather annoyed that the marketing agency had been cold calling her on the Council's behalf. I asked for more information on this, and it transpires that this was customer service research after she'd rung up Envirocall. Now, I'm sure it was well-intentioned and with good purpose, but my constituent didn't quite see it in that way. So I'd therefore invite the administration to consider whether procedures can be adopted which will enable this to prevent this kind of thing happening in the future. If people are on the TPS system, they shouldn't be getting cold calls, whether from the council or from the people. So I hope that can be looked at. I am broadly supportive of the amendment, and I hope we can find common cause on this particular issue, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In view of the fact that there doesn't seem to be very much disagreement on this, and the first half is now underway, perhaps I can just make a couple of very brief comments to second the motion. Like Councillor Stone, I'm delighted to see this private members' bill by Mike Crockett, and I hope that it does go the full way and eventually is enacted. However, I'd just like to say something perhaps unpopular but positive about call centres, which I think is relevant to this debate. I've actually done some work involving people who are working in call centres, training for people who are working in call centres. As many of you may know, the North East accent is apparently considered to be very trustworthy and very telephone friendly, and call centres have become a substantial part of our local economy. I'm aware that cold calling is actually a minor part of call centre activity, and that not all cold calling is actually fraudulent or unhelpful. However, there are certainly many occasions when unsolicited calls are at best a nuisance and at worst a cause of distress, particularly for those who are less confident or more capable of being persuaded. And again, like Councillor Stone, I'm sure I'm not alone with many other members who've supported residents who have been confused or misled by unsolicited calls, and in some cases have actually handed over fairly substantial amounts of money to very dubious organisations who certainly operate in a highly unethical manner, if not in a completely fraudulent manner. Therefore, I do hope that the action we propose in both the motion and the amendment can be carried out and that nuisance calls can be eliminated. This will allow call centre staff to retain their reputation as actually being legitimate and quite helpful in some cases. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Call on Councillor Hobson to move an amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillor Stone for bringing this motion to Council. I'm pleased that he sees the amendment as a helpful one that adds to the original motion. And it's right that about 3 million people fall victim of scams every year, and that 48% of us have been targeted by a scam at some point. And scammers are no different from fraudsters, that they are purely designed to con people out of money. They're using a varying range of techniques to create that sense of urgency on the telephone, that something needs to happen now, that opportunity where it's, you know, if it looks too good to be true, it generally is. But they're also using threats to get money out of people. And some of the latest scams, and one of which I've been subjected to recently, is somebody calling from Microsoft support, offering you've got all this virus stuff on your computer and they'll offer you something to help with that. But also people claiming to be from BT and others claiming that there's phantom debts around that you need to pay urgently. And it's right that we take the time now to give credit to Trading Standards and the other partners, the work that's been done around the no calling zones within Newcastle. And in addition to the 42 that we already have in existence at the moment, there's another 3 under consultation. And absolutely welcome the opportunity to join the No to Nuisance Calls campaign and the opportunity for us to put our support to the campaign. But I'd just like to raise another issue in relation to Trading Standards as well, if I could, Lord Mayor, and that's last month we hosted the Trading Standard Institute's National Trading Standards Conversation, and I was pleased to attend along with our Trading Standards team, and the event was chaired by Lynn Falls-Woods, and she was very complimentary of the ongoing work that's been going in Newcastle and the relationship that we have with our partners here. But what came out of that event was a very real concern over the proposed changes contained in the Consumer Rights Bill, especially where the bill suggests that Trading Standards officers should serve notice on businesses before using their statutory power to enter the premises. And we feel that this proposal marks a fundamental and significant change to how local authority Trading Standards services currently approach the carrying out of routine inspections. And we support the view taken by Councillors Khan and Worth from the LGA Safer Stronger Communities Board that council officers having to serve notices on businesses would add time, costs and bureaucracy to our already stretched resources, not to mention the overall effect of impetus on local authority Trading Standard services. As an inspectorate and market surveillance authority to effectively tackle consumer fraud, I just can't see the logistics in giving scammers, fraudsters and rogue traders 2 days notice that you're going to come round to visit. It's not helpful. Trading Standards officers are being moved from a place of certainty with the law to uncertainty. It will have a dramatic impact on the ability of Trading Standards to do their job effectively, which will impact on residents and local businesses. And last week I attended the Granger Market to support the Real Deal campaign, and that, I have to say, is an absolutely great example of how Trading Standards work to support businesses while protecting consumers, and we need to ensure that they are able to continue to do so. And I'd just like to say to Councillor Stone that we'll certainly look into the issue that you raised as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It was to be seconded by Councillor Lambert, who isn't here. Right. He just wanted to get his voice heard in the chamber. Questions? Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have to say that offering people a no cold calling zone has to be one of the most popular things that I've come across going round my ward, and there's very few people who don't want to stop people knocking on their doors. But many of them also say to me that yes, that's fine, but what are you going to do about the phone? And it really has become beyond a joke. I'm on telephone preference service, and I'm quite amused by the way that most of them these days now start by saying that they're doing a survey, as though that could get round it. I rarely listen any longer. But it does concern me that amongst all the problems of nuisance calls, we're actually drowning out some occasional genuine calls that could help people access grants or funds that will be very useful to them. And the government has taken to trying to phone people about schemes that might be important to them. Very few people are going to listen because they'll just assume it's yet another scam or another person trying to sell them something they don't want. And it seems a terrible waste of government money if they're actually trying to promote schemes such as the Green Deal or energy projects such as insulation, that people aren't going to listen because they get so many calls, they're so sick of it, and it just seems to go on and on. No doesn't seem to be an appropriate answer to these people. They call you at all hours of the day and night. We really do need to tackle this fairly urgently, and I hope that everybody will support this motion.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I rise to support both the intention of the resolution and the amendment. As a single older person, therefore at home quite a lot, I get frequent calls, even though I'm on the telephone preference service. They are a nuisance, and I'm more than capable of being fairly rude to some of these people. However, they are distressing to people who don't have my level of knowledge or indeed confidence, and I know that from my working life with older people. Perhaps I could entertain you with the two I had yesterday, both of which addressed me over-familiarly, I thought, by my forename, and one of them as my love. And I thought, you know, if you seriously want to have my custom, this is not the way to get it, so I said so. But more worryingly, they both also appeared to know that I was, first of all, an older person, and secondly, that I was on my own. Now, this would really worry a less confident person than me. And although I was robust and said I was cutting them off, I wasn't interested. I'd never heard of the organisations they purported to represent, and I certainly wasn't interested in their product or their survey. Nevertheless, it's a real nuisance. It's got to be stopped because it really, as Councillor Taylor just said, detracts from the genuine calls. You assume they're all nonsense, or really frightens vulnerable people. It's an evil of modern society that we really should be tackling, so I very warmly welcome the resolution.
I now call on Councillor Stone to reply.
I haven't got too much to add, I'm afraid, Lord Mayor. Just to thank people who have contributed to the debate. I think there's been, for once this evening, it doesn't always happen, there's been a broad degree of consensus on this particular issue, and let's hope we can agree on this, and hopefully, providing Parliament does the right thing, we'll get this bill on the statute book. Thank you.
Right. Do you want to vote on the amendment, or are we going to have cross-party support?
To accept the amendment, if the colleagues are happy with that.
Agree that? Item 17, rebalancing our cultural capital. Call on Councillor Faulkner to move the motion, seconded by Councillor Forbes.
Well, Lord Mayor, thank you. Again, this is a non-partisan motion from those very reasonable people on this side of the chamber. And I gather from what you say, there's a serious risk that we might be in total agreement on that side of the chamber as well. So I thank the leader for agreeing to second this motion. Just very quickly, I want to congratulate the people who put this very substantial report together. Strongly evidence-based. It includes Peter Stark, who will be known to some of you as the former Chief Executive of Arts Council in the North East, Northern Arts, when we were independent. But this report and this motion is not a whinge just on behalf of the North East. In fact, of all the regions outside London, the North East does best of all per capita on arts funding. But collectively, we're part of the rest of the country that doesn't do it all well in relation to the distribution of funding. And I think that the proposal that they've come up with, some of us might think actually it's a little bit, it's not strong enough, but it's all about a gradual rebalancing, because being frank, we're not going to see any major changes to the gross imbalance that exists at the moment. So this is about a gradual rebalancing, a freeze on London funding on a strictly per capita basis for 5 years, and then see where it goes from there. The figures, well, you've seen some of them in the report, in the motion, but there's a lot more. They speak for themselves. I mean, the worrying thing is that it's an indicative, again, another example of a country that's becoming more and more London-biased. I mean, it is actually getting worse, this imbalance. And I'm not going to restate them, except to put them in a slightly different way, to say that the population of London is 15% of the English population against 85% of the rest, obviously, but arts funding is absolutely the reverse. So 15% of the population gets 85% of DCMS funding, and then there's the imbalances on the lottery and the other things that are mentioned. Now, I look at the reviews in the arts and culture page of my morning newspaper. I still get The Guardian, despite the daily pummeling we get from the columnists as expiation for their sins for recommending people voted Lib Dem at the last election. And, you know, but I guess it's the same in the other quality papers, that over 3/4 of the reviews are actually about events, activities, exhibitions, performances that are in London. The rest of the country doesn't really count. The Arts Council have tried to rebut the figures in the Rebalancing Our Cultural Capital report, but actually they've been proven wrong in absolutely everything we say. And I think the point really is that unless we stand up and fight, then the London-based media and arts institutions, and they're very, very powerful, they'll just strangle this debate and they'll ignore the findings. And the London Mayor has already questioned who paid for the report. Who paid for this report? You know, as if you can't have anything independent which criticises the capital. And then others are trying to fob us all off by saying, well, it's all very well, we'll get the London agencies to do a little more touring, and of course you're getting lots of this beanbag stuff now from London into your cinemas and all the rest of it, so that's fine, isn't it? Well, it's good to have it, but it misses the real point, because the real point is support about artists, support for cultural creators, cultural entrepreneurs, cultural producers in the region. It's not just about how easily the audiences can access what is produced. So I think we need to raise these inequalities, not just at the City Council, but actually in every council in the land. I must admit, I can't move an amendment to my own motion, but just as an add-on, it did occur to me that if the leader agrees, it would be very nice if we could write to other local authorities and ask them perhaps to table exactly the same motion, so we could actually build up a head of steam in local authorities right across the country. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Forbes.
Lord Mayor, in view of the time, I've got 4 brief things to say. I agree with David.
Is there any questions? Councillor Bell.
Lord Mayor, thank you very much. And you know, of course, that I'm very interested in a little bit of culture tonight, so I'll be very brief, as I want to catch the second half. It is true that overall that there's a huge imbalance in the Arts Council fund to London. Everything that David said and everything that we're willing to agree here within the motion. And I've read Peter Stark's report with his colleagues' report, and I've also read the Arts Council's response. And I think there's one thing that is quite very clear, that we need to remember that museums are slightly different in this. And of the 16 major partner museums, only 2 are in London. So I think members should be aware of that. The big nationals in London tend to receive a large amount of their funding direct from DCMS and not indeed from the Arts Council itself. So we need to welcome the continued Arts Council funding, investing in the region through the major partners museums, and would welcome a more equitable distribution of other Arts Council funding. So in total favour of the motion, Lord Mayor, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Call on Councillor Faulkner to reply. Is the motion agreed? Well done, everybody. It's nearly half time. We'll get ourselves away home. Just before we go, I'd just like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy New Year.